Why is your son here, Brenda? This is a workplace, not a daycare. Leticia's sharp voice cut through the conference room, instantly drawing every eye to the young woman at the end of the table. Leticia stood tall and imposing in her crisp navy suit, arms tightly crossed, her gaze unwavering. Brenda instinctively clutched Mateo, her small son, closer. The little boy, his face flushed with fever, let out a soft wheeze as he buried himself into her chest. Her blonde hair clung to her damp cheeks, a testament to the stress that weighed heavily upon her. "I had no one else," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "He's sick. I couldn't possibly miss another day." Leticia merely shook her head, her expression unyielding. "Company policy is explicit, Brenda. No children allowed on site. This is completely unacceptable." A heavy silence descended upon the room. Brenda's eyes darted around, a desperate plea for anyone, to speak up on her behalf. Her coworkers, however, studiously avoided her gaze. She swallowed hard, a dry lump in her throat. "I just needed to finish my shift, that's all." Leticia's tone was clipped, final. "You are terminated. Effective immediately." Brenda froze, her breath catching in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one moved. No one uttered a single word. The only sounds were the faint rustle of papers and the quiet hum of the overhead lights. Leticia turned away, her duty done. Brenda hugged Mateo even closer, his small body radiating a feverish heat against hers. Slowly, her legs trembling, she turned and walked out of the room. The hallway was empty, echoing her isolation. She pushed through the heavy glass doors, stepping out into a gray, drizzling afternoon. The rain tapped softly, mournfully, on the pavement. Brenda quickly pulled off her jacket, wrapping it tightly around Mateo, attempting to shield him from the elements. Her blouse, now exposed, quickly soaked through, clinging uncomfortably to her back. Mateo whimpered softly. "Mama, I'm cold." "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she pressed a kiss to his forehead. They descended the steps, passing a stream of hurried people, umbrellas raised, none stopping, none even glancing in their direction. The world, it seemed, kept moving, utterly indifferent. She felt utterly invisible. Each step she took felt heavier than the last. Her job was gone. Her child was sick. The bills, she knew, were relentlessly growing. Her phone was dead. She had no car, no one to call, yet she kept walking, one foot in front of the other. At the street corner, she paused, her breath catching. Mateo's breathing was shallow, a faint, worrying wheeze accompanying each exhalation. Brenda held him tighter still, pressing her cheek to his warm forehead. "We're going to be okay," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Mama's not giving up." The rain now fell harder, a steady, relentless downpour. Brenda shielded him as best she could, tucking his head securely under her chin. He coughed again, a weak, rattling sound, his tiny hand instinctively gripping her necklace. She passed a brightly lit cafe, a beacon of warmth glowing from its windows. Inside, people laughed, dry and safe and oblivious. Brenda hesitated for a fleeting moment, then turned away before anyone inside could catch sight of her. She kept moving. In her head, a mantra began to form, repeating itself with quiet insistence. "I will not give up. I will not give up." She crossed the street, water splashing around her worn shoes, and ducked under a store awning, seeking a moment's meager shelter. Mateo stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible in his sleep. Brenda looked down at him, her gaze filled with fierce devotion, and gently brushed the wet curls from his forehead. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, a solemn promise hanging in the damp air. I promise. The rain didn't stop. The wind didn't ease. But she stood there, cradling her son, not in despair, but in quiet, unyielding determination. She had nothing left but him, and for her that was truly everything. Brenda clutched a stack of resumes, their edges worn, the creases deepening with every crushing rejection. She had crisscrossed the town on foot, knocking on doors, speaking with weary managers, leaving applications at every diner, convenience store, gas station, and even janitorial service she could find. Each conversation inevitably ended the same way. Polite smiles would slowly fade the moment they inquired about her last job. The instant the word terminated appeared on her record, the tone abruptly shifted. I'm sorry, ma'am. We're looking for someone with a more stable history. HR flags that kind of dismissal. Nothing we can do. We'll call if something opens up, they'd say. But the call never came. By the 4th week, Brenda had pawned her engagement ring, an heirloom long left in a drawer after Mateo's father had vanished. The meager money went towards food and a single bottle of asthma medication, the cheapest she could possibly find without insurance. It was not enough. One night, as the wind howled fiercely outside the fragile shelter of a half-lit gas station restroom, Mateo's breathing turned shallow and rapid. His small chest heaved violently with each desperate inhale. Brenda crouched beside him, holding the inhaler tightly, whispering, "Just breathe, baby. Please breathe." She counted to 10 with him, trying desperately to keep her voice calm, even as hot tears burned behind her eyes. He nodded, trusting her completely, oblivious to the fact that she had no home, no savings, and a child who desperately needed more than love alone could provide. The gas station attendant, an older woman named Carol with kind, tired eyes, took pity on them. She allowed them to stay in the employees' restroom during the night. It wasn't much, just a hard bench, a thin blanket Carol had pulled from her car, and a flickering fluorescent light, but it was dry and warm enough to keep Mateo safe. During the nights, Brenda cleaned, a silent, tireless figure mopping bathrooms, refilling paper towels, wiping greasy doorknobs, and overflowing trash bins. She worked in silence, her hands raw and chafed, her knees aching from hours on the cold tile. The biting smell of ammonia and bleach filled her lungs, a harsh scent that nonetheless kept her awake. Every dollar she earned was counted not once, not twice, but 3 times before she dared to spend it. One evening, she returned to the small restroom after her shift. Mateo lay curled peacefully under the thin blanket, his breathing steady at last. His face was serene in sleep, his cheeks still slightly flushed from the lingering fever. Brenda sat down beside him, gently smoothing back his damp hair. She leaned down and kissed his forehead tenderly, whispering into the quiet darkness, "You did so good today, sweetheart. Mama's proud of you." He stirred slightly, a soft murmur escaping, his lips. "I love you, Mama." Her throat tightened with emotion. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 3 a.m. Her next shift would begin in less than an hour. She could barely feel her legs, and her arms trembled uncontrollably from sheer exhaustion. Brenda pulled the blanket tighter around him and carefully tucked the inhaler close to his chest. Then she whispered, "Sleep well, my little lion. I'll be right back." She stood, quietly shutting the door behind her. The hallway was empty, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly as she picked up the mop and bucket. Her body ached. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her resolve remained unwavering. She would clean. Her body ached. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her resolve remained unwavering. She would clean every floor in the city if it meant Mateo could breathe, if it meant he would smile again without a wheeze in his chest. She whispered it to herself like a quiet prayer. I'll come back. I always come back. Days later, Brenda had grown accustomed to the soft morning knock on her door. 3 gentle taps, a brief pause, then a kind voice speaking in Spanish. Mija, I brought you something. It was Mrs. Maria, her neighbor from down the hall. The older woman had weathered her own storms in life, raising 4 children alone, surviving layoffs, scraping together dignity through sheer will. Brenda had once helped her carry groceries upstairs, and since then Maria had watched over her like a guardian angel in worn slippers and a headscarf that always smelled of lavender. That morning, Maria handed Brenda a folded flyer. Solix Rivera, it read in bold letters across the top. Now hiring afternoon janitorial staff. No diploma required. Brenda stared at it as if it might vanish into thin air. They're a cleaning company, Maria explained, her voice gentle. They take care of office buildings mostly. It is not glamorous, but it is steady. Her gaze softened as she looked at Mateo, who sat nearby drawing superheroes on scraps of cardboard. And they are run by our people. Maybe they understand. Brenda clutched the flyer tightly. Thank you, she whispered. I'll go right now. The very next day, she and Mateo embarked on a journey across town, taking 2 buses. Mateo clung to her hand, his small legs already tired, before they even arrived. The building that housed Solix Rivera was plain, constructed of gray brick with a modest lobby that smelled faintly of lemon and floor polish. Brenda signed in at the front desk and was handed a short application. She sat in a hard plastic chair, balancing the form on her knee, trying desperately not to let her hand shake as she filled out her name, her past employment, and the question she dreaded most. Have you ever been terminated from a job? Her pen hovered over the checkbox for a moment, then, with a deep breath, she checked. Yes. Beside her, Mateo coughed, a deep crackling sound that startled the receptionist at the desk. Brenda immediately placed her hand on his back, whispering, Shh, it's okay, baby. He leaned against her shoulder, his breathing heavy. The inhaler was nearly empty again. At that precise moment, a man walked through the lobby, deep in thought, holding a set of keys and a phone. He wore dark jeans, a white button-up shirt with the sleeves casually rolled up, and a look that suggested he hadn't slept much in days. His hair was graying noticeably at the temples, and his eyes, dark and keenly observant, caught on Mateo. He slowed his step, his gaze briefly lingering. Brenda noticed him glancing their way. For a moment, their eyes met. His gaze flicked from her to Mateo, then back to her. There was something in his expression, not pity, not judgment, but a subtle flicker of memory, a spark of recognition. Then, just as quickly, he nodded politely and moved on, continuing his path. Brenda finished the form with trembling fingers and handed it back to the receptionist. She didn't truly expect to hear from them, convinced that her past termination would once again be an insurmountable barrier. Yet the very next afternoon, her phone buzzed unexpectedly. Miss Lopez, a voice began, this is Elena from Solix Rivera. We'd like to offer you a part-time custodial position on the afternoon shift. You'd start tomorrow. Brenda's mouth fell open. Wait, really? Yes, the voice confirmed. And we understand you may need to bring your child. There is a break room available as long as he stays safe and out of the work zones. Brenda could barely speak, tears stinging her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. She hung up, a wave of relief washing over her, and pulled Mateo into her lap. We got it, baby. Mama's working again. The next day, Brenda stepped into the company's modest headquarters with her son by her side. The staff was incredibly kind, many of them immigrants like her, speaking a warm blend of English and Spanish. Elena, the supervisor, showed her where the supplies were stored and then pointed out the employee break room, a small, unassuming space with a worn couch, a mini fridge, and an old TV that still played DVDs. Mateo sat quietly on the couch, sketchbook in hand, while Brenda got to work. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, emptied trash bins, and meticulously wiped glass doors. It was hard physical work, demanding and relentless, but she was grateful for every single second of it. At one point during her shift, Brenda glanced through the glass window into the hallway and saw the man from the lobby again. Bruce Rivera, she remembered. He paused briefly when he saw her working, then offered a small, acknowledging nod, one of quiet recognition rather than superiority. She nodded back, still unsure of who he truly was. But in that moment, she felt something profound shift within her. A door had opened, and this time, she was walking through it. Every afternoon, Brenda slipped on her gloves and got to work. She scrubbed restroom sinks until they shone. She mopped scuffed tile floors and wiped smudges off glass doors until her reflection stared back clearly. She did not complain. She did not pause. Even when her back ached relentlessly and her hands stung from the harsh cleaning agents, Brenda carried on because just down the hall in a small break room with a worn couch and faded walls, her son was safe. Mateo stayed curled up with his sketchbook, his crayons worn down to stubs, diligently drawing stick-figured heroes and crooked hearts. Brenda checked on him every hour. She would rush in, crouch down, and gently wipe the sweat from his brow with the corner of her sleeve, even if it still smelled faintly of ammonia and bleach. "You okay, baby?" she whispered each time. Mateo always nodded, often too tired to speak, but his eyes always searched hers for reassurance, and she gave it quietly, with a soft kiss on his forehead and a gentle hand brushing back his curls. It was a rhythm they learned together. Brenda cleaned, Mateo rested, and the hours ticked by like fragile, whispered promises. One Wednesday afternoon, something changed. Brenda walked into the break room to check on her son as usual and stopped dead in the doorway. Mateo was sitting up, his eyes wide with wonder, his hands frozen mid-air above a small table. Spread out before him was a neat array of treasures, a brand-new box of colored pencils, 2 thick comic books, and a small stuffed lion with soft fur and a crooked smile. He looked up at her, his voice a bewildered whisper. "Mama, where did this come from?" Brenda stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. I don't know." She picked up the box of pencils, flipping it over as if some explanation would be printed on the back. Nothing. She opened one of the comic books, still crisp, still smelling of new paper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed it back down. Mateo's eyes sparkled with the kind of pure joy she had not seen in weeks. "Can I keep them?" he asked quietly, his voice full of hope. Brenda nodded, too stunned to speak. "Yes, baby. Of course." Later during her break, she asked the other custodians, "Did someone leave these in the break room for my son?" Heads shook in unison. Everyone seemed just as surprised as she was. Elena, her supervisor, simply shrugged. "Maybe it was one of the office staff. I don't know. But it's sweet, isn't it?" Brenda smiled and murmured a silent thank you to no one in particular. But in her heart, a quiet warmth bloomed, a comforting ember of hope. Down the hallway, behind a slightly ajar office door, Bruce Rivera stood perfectly still. He had passed by the break room just moments earlier, unseen by them, and had watched as Mateo reached for the new pencils with trembling hands. He had watched the boy's eyes light up, illuminating the small room, the same way his own used to when his mother, a hotel maid, brought him a sandwich she had saved from a guest's leftovers. He remembered precisely what it was like to be the child in the corner, ignored, unseen, until someone, finally, chose to notice. He had not meant to stand there as long as he did. But when he saw Brenda kneel beside her son, her eyes shimmering with raw emotion, something in his chest pulled taut, a painful, familiar ache. He gripped the edge of the doorframe, his jaw tight. There were few memories in his life more painful than watching his mother scrub hotel floors at midnight, exhausted, with no one to help her. And few were still more sacred than remembering the one time someone had left him a toy on Christmas Eve, a gesture so small it had, profoundly, shaped his entire understanding of kindness. He had not planned to intervene, to get involved, but this was different. That night, Brenda sat beside Mateo as he drew with his new pencils. He colored a superhero with curly hair and a tiny lion by his side, its mane a vibrant yellow. Brenda leaned her head against the back of the couch and smiled, softly, watching her son. "Someone's watching over us," she whispered, almost to herself. Mateo looked up, his young face earnest. "Like a guardian angel?" Brenda nodded. "Maybe." Down the hall, Bruce returned to his desk and stared at the closed door of his office for a long, quiet time. Sometimes the smallest things made the biggest difference, and sometimes, he mused, it truly started with a simple box of colored pencils. The supply closet was dimly lit, its air thick with the pungent scent of cleaning chemicals and old cardboard. Brenda knelt on the linoleum floor, her knees pressed against the cold tile, one hand clutching a damp rag. Mateo lay nearby on a folded towel, his face pale, his eyes glazed with fever. To make him smile, to coax even a flicker of joy, Brenda twisted the rag into the crude shape of a puppet, wiggling it back and forth in front of him. "Look, Mateo! Senor Sock is here to rescue the day," she said, in a funny, squeaky voice, letting out a forced, exaggerated laugh. She danced the makeshift puppet across his thin blanket, making exaggerated movements and silly sounds. Mateo giggled softly, a raspy sound, but a genuine smile bloomed across his tired face. A small victory for Brenda. Through the narrow crack in the closet door, Bruce stood motionless. He had followed the faint sound of the boy's cough, drawn by an invisible thread. He had come down to check on a shipment, but stopped abruptly when he heard the faint sound of laughter, small, wheezing, yet undeniably real. What he saw next paralyzed him. Brenda, kneeling there with sweat on her brow and stains on her uniform, looked utterly exhausted, yet she was smiling. She was making her son laugh in the middle of a utilitarian closet, using nothing but a dirty rag. Bruce stepped back quietly, unseen, and returned to his office. He sat down slowly behind his desk, stared at the ceiling, and rubbed his eyes. But it was not fatigue that burned them. It was memory. He saw his mother again, decades ago, in the back of a cheap motel where she worked as a night cleaner. He was 5, feverish, and scared. She had no toys, no medicine, nothing but 2 mismatched socks she had ingeniously turned into dancing puppets. They made him laugh then, too, just like Mateo. And just like Mateo, he had had no idea how incredibly tired she must have been. 3 days later, the skies opened with a vengeance. The rain fell in thick, relentless sheets, flooding gutters, and washing over the parking lot of the Rivera building. It was nearly 7 p.m., and most of the staff had already gone home. Brenda exited the side door, holding Mateo tight against her chest, his head buried deep in her jacket. She had no umbrella, only a fraying coat she wrapped fiercely around them both, shielding him as best she could from the biting wind and torrential rain. As she stepped into the downpour, a shadow moved silently beside her. A large, dark umbrella suddenly opened above them, providing an immediate, unexpected sanctuary. Brenda turned in surprise. Bruce stood next to her, silent, steady, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. Rain pelted relentlessly around them, but under the umbrella, it was surprisingly quiet, almost sacred. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply walked beside her across the slick asphalt. Mateo, sensing the sudden shelter, peeked out from her jacket, his eyes wide with curiosity. When they reached the very edge of the lot, Bruce stopped. He gently handed her the umbrella. "No one who tries that hard to do the right thing deserves to walk in the rain," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the drumming of the rain. Then, without waiting for thanks, he turned and walked back toward the building, disappearing into the downpour. Brenda stood there, umbrella in one hand, her son in the other, utterly stunned into silence. From that day on, something profound shifted. She started to notice him more. How he always arrived early, even before the first rays of dawn. How he always made a point of asking employees about their families, truly listening to their answers. How he lingered for a moment outside the break room door, as if silently checking that Mateo was okay. He never asked for recognition. In fact, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable with it. Brenda began to understand him in ways she could not explain, a quiet, unspoken connection forming between them. A week later, Mateo entered the main office with a folded piece of paper clutched in his small hand. Brenda had asked him to wait in the break room, but he had wandered off with quiet, determined purpose. Bruce was at his desk, deep in thought, reviewing invoices when the boy suddenly appeared. "This is for you," Mateo said, holding out the paper. Bruce took it and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. A tall man with a large umbrella stood over a woman and a child in the rain. A wide, joyful smile stretched across the child's face. Above the drawing, Mateo had painstakingly written in block letters, "Thank you, Mr. Bruce. You're like a quiet superhero." Bruce's throat tightened. He looked at the drawing, then at Mateo, a profound emotion stirring within him. At the boy who simply shrugged and said, "Mama says people like you save the day without making noise." Bruce reached out and gently ruffled Mateo's hair. "I'll keep it safe," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. And he did. He taped it carefully to the inside of his office cabinet. A private treasure. That night, he placed a small labeled inhaler inside Brenda's locker. There was a note tucked beside it. "For the breaths that matter most." He also called Elena, the supervisor, and discreetly arranged to cover the cost of Brenda and Mateo's lunch for the rest of the month, anonymously, of course. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to repay a kindness once given to him long ago by a woman who had nothing but never let him feel it. Just like Brenda. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Bruce walked into the break room holding a small paper bag. "I thought Mateo might like these," he said, placing the bag gently on the table. Brenda looked up from where she was wiping down the counter. "More cookies?" she asked with a playful smile, a lightness in her voice she hadn't known for a long time. Bruce chuckled. "He said he likes the ones with the chocolate chips and caramel. I figured I'd try to get it right this time." Mateo peeked into the bag and his face lit up. "Mama, they're still warm." Brenda watched as Bruce sat beside her son and listened intently to him chatter about his drawings, his favorite superhero powers, and the comic book he was trying to write. Bruce smiled, nodded, and even laughed genuinely when Mateo declared he wanted to be a super cleaner, like his mom. When Mateo eventually ran off to the corner to draw, Brenda found herself watching Bruce more closely, a question forming on her lips. "I've always wondered," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Why do you care so much about us?" Bruce looked at her, the amusement in his eyes fading just a little, his smile thinning. He was quiet for a moment, a pause heavy with unspoken history before replying. "Because I was Mateo," he said, his voice low and steady. "And my mom, she was a Brenda. Strong, stubborn, tired all the time, but she never gave up." Brenda blinked, surprised by the raw honesty, the profound weight behind his words. He continued, his eyes distant, lost in a powerful memory. "She used to sneak me into hotel closets while she cleaned night shifts. I remember sleeping on towels, hearing her hum lullabies while she scrubbed floors, seeing her tears fall silently." Brenda didn't speak, utterly absorbed. For the first time she saw Bruce not just as the man who quietly helped them, but as someone shaped by the same kind of pain, someone who had learned empathy through the crucible of survival. In that moment, the air between them shifted. The boundaries blurred. A few days later, the company held its annual anniversary celebration. Folding chairs lined the vast warehouse floor. A small stage at the front was cheerfully decorated with balloons in Rivera blue and white. Employees gathered, laughing, eating cake, chatting in a lively mix of English and Spanish. Brenda stood discreetly in the back, wearing her cleanest uniform. Mateo beside her in a slightly too big button-up shirt that Maria had meticulously ironed for the occasion. When Bruce stepped onto the stage, the room gradually quieted, a respectful hush falling over the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice resonating with sincerity. Solutions Rivera was built by people who understand struggle, who know what it means to work hard with little and to dream. Despite it. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze eventually landing on Brenda, standing quietly in the back. "I want to tell you a story," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "When I was a child, my mother was a janitor. She worked nights, scrubbing floors in silence, often hiding me in utility closets because we could not afford childcare. She never complained, never asked for help, and no one ever offered it." The room was absolutely still, the air thick with an unspoken emotion. "A few weeks ago, I saw a young mother doing the exact same thing," Bruce continued, his voice gaining a quiet power. "Tired, overworked, and loving her son with every breath she had left. I saw her, and I remembered." He paused, swallowing hard, a visible tremor in his throat. "I am profoundly proud to work alongside someone like Brenda Lopez. Her strength, her grace, her unwavering commitment. She is everything this company stands for." There was a beat of stunned silence before the applause erupted, loud, heartfelt, and lasting. "And so," Bruce added, raising his voice just slightly above the burgeoning sound, "it is my honor to officially promote Brenda to supervising custodian, effective immediately." Brenda's mouth fell open slightly, her breath catching in her throat, a shock wave rippling through her. Then, turning toward Mateo, his gaze tender, Bruce announced, "Solutions Rivera will be providing a full education scholarship for Mateo Lopez, covering his schooling through high school and into college if he chooses, because no child should carry the weight of their parents' struggle alone." The crowd was on their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping away tears of their own. Brenda's legs threatened to give way beneath her. She felt Mateo's small hand slip into hers, a comforting anchor. She wasn't crying for the promotion or the scholarship, or even the public recognition. She was crying because for the first time in a long, long time, she did not feel alone. Bruce stepped off the stage and walked directly toward her. He did not say anything, just looked at her, his eyes soft, a quiet question in their depths. She nodded, unable to speak, a silent acknowledgement of his profound gesture, and he smiled, because sometimes the loudest words are the ones left unspoken, and sometimes the most powerful victories come, not from climbing, but from holding someone else steady until they can stand on their own. Brenda adjusted the collar of her crisp white shirt, checking the name tag pinned just above her heart. It read, Brenda Lopez, Supervisor. The very first time she saw it, she had nearly cried. Now she wore it with quiet pride, a badge of honor. Her mornings started earlier, her voice was firmer when she greeted the cleaning teams, her steps more confident as she walked the well-lit halls. She still worked hard, perhaps even harder, but there was a fundamental difference now. She felt seen, she felt heard, and she held her head just a little higher. Mateo's life changed, too. His new school had a real library, one with beanbags and shelves overflowing with superhero books. The teachers knew his name by the second day. They greeted him at the door, asked about his drawings, genuinely encouraged his stories. He started smiling more, laughing louder, breathing easier. Some days Brenda would find Bruce in the break room after his own meetings, sitting across from Mateo at the little table, a chessboard between them. Bruce was not very good at chess, and he knew it. But Mateo always giggled when he inevitably beat his quiet superhero. He caught him making a clumsy move. Other times, Bruce would casually bring a new comic book, pretending it was just lying around his office, subtly leaving it for Mateo to discover. Mateo would leap into his arms with unfiltered joy, his little face radiant. Brenda would watch from the hallway, her arms crossed over her chest, a soft smile playing on her lips, despite herself. She and Bruce never explicitly talked about what was happening between them, but the air was undeniably different now. When they passed in the hall, his eyes lingered a little longer than necessary. When he asked how her day was, the question always carried a palpable weight, a genuine concern. And when she answered, he truly listened, absorbing every word. They moved in slow, unspoken steps, two people not rushing towards something new, but quietly, profoundly healing from something old. One Thursday evening, the rain came fast and hard. Thunder echoed ominously off the building walls as streaks of lightning momentarily lit up the sky. Brenda stayed late, catching up on reports and helping a new team member get oriented. By the time she clocked out, the hallways were dark and silent, most employees long gone. She walked toward the exit, knowing Mateo was already waiting safely with Elena in the break room. But something caught her eye just outside Bruce's office door. On the floor lay a neatly folded raincoat, brand new, a deep, rich blue with a practical hood. Next to it sat a small takeout container, steam still curling faintly from the edges, releasing a comforting aroma. A simple note lay on top, written in strong, clean handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up." Brenda stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. She picked up the note, her fingers brushing lightly over the empowering words. The inviting scent of warm rice and grilled chicken drifted up from the container. Her throat tightened, a lump forming. She slowly turned her head and saw him. Bruce was standing at the far end of the hallway, leaning slightly against the door frame, a silent sentinel. He did not move toward her. He did not say a word. He simply nodded once, a soft, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. And in that single, profound look, Brenda felt everything. Gratitude, yes, but also admiration, deep care, something more profound than mere kindness. She clutched the raincoat to her chest, feeling its solid, comforting weight. In that silent, rain-soaked moment, she knew what they had was no longer just about a second chance. It was the start of something neither of them had dared to believe in again. Something that began not with fireworks, but with small, steady gestures, and a note that said more than any grand speech ever could. The rooftop was quiet, a peaceful sanctuary. High above the city's gentle Sunday hum, the late afternoon sun spilled across the concrete in golden streaks. A soft breeze stirred the corners of Brenda's blouse as she stepped out onto the terrace, the door clicking shut softly behind her. She squinted slightly against the warm, brilliant light. And there he was. Bruce stood near the edge, his hands casually in his pockets, his gaze cast over the distant horizon. The setting sun painted the vast sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink, like the world had decided to slow down just for them. She walked toward him, her footsteps light but steady, a sense of quiet anticipation building within her. "You said it was important," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper in the vastness. He turned, that familiar, gentle smile tugging at his lips, the one that always felt like a shared secret between them. "It is," he replied. For a moment, they simply stood there side by side, bathed in the dying light of the sun, the silent understanding between them deeper than any words. There, two people shaped by storms, now meeting in the calm that followed. Bruce reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. No velvet, no elaborate ceremony, just simplicity. He opened it, revealing a silver bracelet, thin, elegant, and understated. On the inside, one word was engraved in small, clear letters. "Always." "I am not proposing," he said gently, his eyes never leaving hers, their gaze locked in a silent understanding. "I do not have a speech or a grand plan or anything fancy to offer." He stepped closer, the distance between them dissolving. "I just want to say this." He held out the bracelet, his voice quiet but unwavering, filled with a deep, earnest sincerity. "I cannot promise forever. I cannot promise easy, but I can promise this. I will always be someone you and Mateo can lean on. Whenever you need me, however you need me, even if it's just to sit beside you and listen." Brenda looked down at the bracelet in his hand, then up at the man offering it. Not a knight in shining armor, not a savior, but something far more rare. Someone real, someone steadfast. She did not speak right away. Instead, she reached out, took the bracelet, and held it gently in her palm, feeling its cool weight. Then, with the faintest, most genuine smile, she looked back at Bruce and stepped forward, her arms wrapping around him, firm and certain. Not because she needed rescuing, but because someone finally stood beside her and saw her. Not as a burden, not as a symbol, but as a person worth choosing, worth staying for. She rested her head against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Bruce closed his eyes and held her close, the city stretching out below them, the vast sky turning softer with each passing second, painting the world in hues of twilight. A sudden shout broke the stillness. "Mama!" Mateo came bounding onto the rooftop, his cheeks pink from running, his hair tousled by the wind. He skidded to a stop when he saw them embracing, and his face broke into a wide, unadulterated grin. "You're smiling, Mama," he said breathlessly, his eyes wide with joy. "You look like a superhero now." Brenda laughed, a clear, bright sound that echoed gently in the quiet air, a sound full of newfound happiness. She opened one arm and Mateo ran into it without hesitation, wrapping his small arms around her. Bruce knelt beside them, pulling the boy into the circle of warmth, completing their embrace. The three of them huddled together, the sunset draping its golden light over their shoulders like a soft, comforting blanket. No wedding, no grand declaration, just the kind of love that grows quietly, like a seed planted in the dark and watered with hope. They stood there for a long while, watching the world below as the last light faded. They did not need to say anything else because sometimes family is not defined by blood or vows. Sometimes it is simply the people who stay, who see the worst parts of you and choose to stay anyway, illuminating your path. And in the glow of that fading sun, with a bracelet that said always, a boy who finally felt safe, and two hearts finally steady, Brenda realized something profound. She did not need a perfect ending. She just needed this moment, this quiet, loving connection, and it was more than enough. Bruce knelt beside them, pulling the boy into the circle of warmth. The three of them huddled together, the sunset draping its golden light over their shoulders like a soft blanket. No wedding, no grand declaration, just the kind of love that grows quietly, like a seed planted in the dark and watered with hope. They stood there for a long while, watching the world below. They did not need to say anything else because sometimes family is not defined by blood or vows. Sometimes it is simply the people who stay, who see the worst parts of you and choose to stay anyway. And in the glow of that fading sun, with a bracelet that said always, a boy who finally felt safe, and two hearts finally steady, Brenda realized something. She did not need a perfect ending. She just needed this moment, and it was more than enough.